gold flying, crude oil flying, market diving. You want to know why? Stay tuned for more on The Rebel's Edge. Bang! Welcome, folks. Marc LoPresti, right over there, in for Pete Najarian, who is traveling to the 10X conference that Marc and I are down here in Florida. That's Grant Cardone and the 10X conference. A lot of famous people, a lot of very interesting audience participants, and some 41,000 people signed up for this one. And Marc LoPresti and I will be over there this afternoon again, along with tomorrow and the next day. So welcome, everybody, to The Rebel's Edge. We got to dive right in because we got a lot of stuff to cover today. So thanks for joining us. And as always, Marc going to be providing some great insight. Marc, macro minute, I'm going to say the strong ISM yesterday. Well, that kind of shocked the markets a little, and the bond yields jumped up to 4.3. But it didn't get any better today, Marc.
No, it didn't. Look, I think that ISM that you mentioned, still traders digesting the PCE numbers from Friday and kind of realizing that inflation is still not going in the right direction. And I always try to remind people, say, well, the PCE and the PCI was in line with expectation. It wasn't as bad as we thought it was going to be. It's still trending higher. It's just not trending as high as it was in a previous period. And look, John, we had some pretty significant exuberance in the market in Q1. You had to think that some of that froth had to come off the market latte, if you will. And those kind of numbers like that ISM giving traders an excuse, and the sell-off accelerating as we come into the beginning of today's show.
Marc is so right, folks. All major indices are down over 1% at mid-session. So that's kind of painful, although we did have that very nice start to the year that he mentioned. All right, Marc, let's dive into fantastic futures.
Fantastic futures.
So fantastic futures, Marc. Bitcoin breaking down. So as gold goes up, Bitcoin's going down. Gold, another record high. Bitcoin, Marc, down as much as 6.5% today. What do you make of that?
Yeah, well, I mean, that tends to be that, inverse correlation between gold and Bitcoin. That's not news to any of our loyal viewers. My fantastic future today may have to be a little bit of a continuation of one that Pete and I covered last week, and we've covered a lot on the show, and that's oil, right? Tensions in the Middle East not letting up, OPEC saber rattling, crude reaching, I think, around 85 just before we went live. And as I've said before, John, I think given the overall macroeconomic and level of unrest, the picture, the global picture, and the demand construct as well, I continue to remain bullish on oil. We could see it crossing 90 in the not too distant future. Summer driving season is coming. It's warm down here in Florida, but it's getting warmer up north too. And you know what that means, higher prices at the pump.
It's going to mean that at least likely until the week before 4th of July, when the travel season peaks. But we'll see if we keep seeing Russia and Ukraine trying to take out each other's either oil or electric grids. Well, that's just more demand that's going to be shouldered by, I guess, the rest of us, Marc.
Yeah,
all right.
That's right.
Let's talk now about Humana, because Humana came out and said, you know what? We kind of thought that Medicare and Medicaid services were going to give us a break because we knew it was going up. They told us it was going up, but we kind of thought they might not push it up as much as they indicated they would. Just like J-Pow, Marc, turns out you should take them at their word that they did indeed move an average 3.7% to the upside.
Right.
Humana just cratering today.
Yeah, look, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm keeping score, John, this is 2 strikes so far for the 2024 season for the healthcare sector. Misdiagnosing, if you'll excuse what my daughter would only suggest as a dad joke when we're covering healthcare, but misdiagnosing yet another key metric. What I'm referring to in terms of their first strike, of course, what we heard during Q1 when this sector got crushed in managed care, because they said, well, you know what, we didn't anticipate that there would be this continued demand, and certainly not continued demand at this level for electives, all of those procedures that folks put off, and apparently we're still putting off during COVID and post-COVID. So I'm starting to question, what are they relying on in anticipating and painting their financial projections in companies like Humana? This is a sell-off that I think is well-deserved. I was pretty vicious in my evaluation of this sector when they had that elective print in terms of missing what they thought the demand for electives was and how that would impact the 2024 financial picture for the sector. And Jon, this May, as you and I said going into the end of last year, what are the sectors that are going to be most ripe for M&A activity? We talked about energy, of course. We also talked about healthcare. We've seen both of those themes play out in 2024. This could be another reason for consolidation in the healthcare space. We will see.
Yeah. Aetna, CVS Health, United Health, all of these folks getting cracked by this. Yeah. And by the way, Humana was $472 a share at the beginning of this year. Today it breaks 300. Yeah. So that, my friends, is a big drop. All right. How about Verve, V-E-R-V, Mark? Verve Therapeutics down huge today. Patient trials were ceased. Now, that's never really a good thing unless they're saying, yep, it worked so great, we can stop the trials. That is not the case here. Out of the 13 patients that were dosed with this treatment, a lot of them had some serious issues within 3 days of dosing. Again, not what VERV or its shareholders wanted to hear, and thus both hands, Mark, they are selling today.
And that's no surprise. Look, this is a company that's been bid up pretty high historically, Jon, because they're in a hot subsector of healthcare. They're in that gene editing, that DNA manipulation we've been hearing so much about, that if you can figure out how to get into the human code, right, into our genes, you can perhaps solve some of these problems of chronic diseases. Verve, of course, with their VRV-101, which was the drug that they killed at the end of phase 1 because of the negative impacts, and that the placebo actually helped as much as the people taking the active stuff that didn't get sick from it. This is gene editing treatments for cholesterol, which impacts a massive swath of our population, of course. They say that VRV-102, the next version of this, which I think is going to go into phase 1 in the not too distant future, will do the trick. I'm dubious. I'm not a buyer. I'm actually keeping a fairly bearish outlook on this company.
Well, unfortunately, I'm in the same camp, Mark. You would think before they go to human clinical trials that they would have had much more positive results than what they've shown us so far. And instead now stopping those trials as quickly as they did. That's probably prudent, but it's also not indicative of some prudent folks managing those pre-trial with humans. All right,
that's right.
PVH, sort of like VFC, VF Corp, these guys own brands. And as Marc LoPresti was telling me before the show, they used to own a lot of brands, and now they only own 2. That would be Calvin Klein and I guess Tommy Hilfiger. And apparently sales, Mark, of those 2, they did need to spread that out a little bit more, because those 2, the warnings going forward, pretty dark indeed.
Yeah, and you know, around this news, you heard a lot from the C-suite of this company about how maybe it's related to reduced demand out of China, reduced wholesale demand, things of that nature. Jon, I think this company has a bigger and more endemic problem, and that is these are 2 brands that, let's face it, folks, they've been around for a long, long time. They're both desperately in need of a refresh. They don't have the cachet that either of these brands did 5, 10, or 20 years ago. And you know how I start to determine when these kind of companies are getting into trouble? when you see them as the primary fodder at places like Marshall's, Kohl's, TJ Maxx, go and look, folks. Next time you're in one of those stores, see how much Tommy Hilfiger, see how much Calvin Klein stuff is in that inventory. That's not front rack at Nordstrom's. That's not front rack at Macy's. This is not stuff that has the consumer demand it needs to keep this company healthy. I think there's continued headwind for this company as they try to keep those brands relevant.
Very, very good. All right, Mark, what about GE? Now, in the pre-market, the stock was down pretty big. It's a conglomerate, of course. They are spinning off into 3 separate companies. They announced that a while ago. Today's the day. So following this spinoff, GE is now known as GE Aerospace. Well, for whatever reason, that pre-market sell-off has now been met with a pretty strong bout of buying, quite frankly, Mark, because now it's up 1.25% after being down as much as 4% in the pre-market. So pretty nice turnaround, actually, for GE.
Yeah, for sure. And I didn't really understand the pressure to the downside in the pre. This is great news for this company. The only reason, or the primary reason, in my humble opinion, why this company was split is because you had 3 disparate divisions of GE, and most people don't really talk about this: healthcare, renewable energy, and aerospace. Those are 3 very different industries, 3 very different sectors that have multiples attached to them, right? The price that investors or traders are willing to pay for these stocks that could not have a bigger delta, John. The aerospace is the 25 plus, right? The stuff that's in healthcare below 10, renewable somewhere in that range, depending on the company. This made sense. Kudos to Culp for taking what's been considered a rather controversial move and busting up what was once America's largest company and largest conglomerate, of course. But this is good news. I'm not surprised to see the buyers come into the stock. Would not be surprised to see this thing close even higher than where it is right now.
Yeah, in particular, this survivor known as GE Aerospace, like Mark said, I got to think, Mark, that even though Boeing's got the problems that it has right now, there's an awful lot of demand for exactly what GE Aerospace does. And maybe that demand will accelerate because of some of the problems that Boeing's had to deal with, which include, of course, some of the repair and maintenance issues at United.
Yeah. Yeah,
Sadly,
it's not just the
because
Boeing story,
you and I
John.
fly those guys.
Yeah, tell me about it, including yesterday. No, it's not just really a Boeing story. I mean, if you look at the analyst estimates across the aerospace and defense industry, they have revised their estimates, and in some instances, 25, 30, 40% near-term estimates in terms of to the upside for about 6 or 7 of the major aerospace names. It's not a big surprise, right? Not rocket science to overuse that expression. When you look at what's going on in the world, we've got unrest. Unfortunately, there's lots of theaters, as the defense folks would say. That means more demand for stuff like this company produces, and that's why I am bullish, not only today, but I'm bullish on this newly spun off aerospace division of GE.
Thank you, Mark. Well, we don't have Pete with us because he's traveling to South Florida right now, and we will unite with him in just a couple hours. But in the meantime, we've got Pete's Red Zone Sports, and just have to share a little bit of something with you on Caitlyn Clark and her great evening last night for the University of Iowa. But first, let's take a look at this little highlight reel of sorts, Mark.
You are a champion on and off the court.
It's amazing to watch Cambridge continue to commit to women's sports, and I know you're going to love working with their team.
You are a bright light in the future of women's sports.
Yes, she is.
Welcome to Team Cambridge.
Yeah. I love
You two
that
changed
one.
the game for generations of athletes like me. I'm working on changing the game on the court, and Cambridge is doing the same in the financial world. It's a perfect fit. Let's go.
Nice. Cambridge. Well, kudos to them, Mark. Gainbridge, State Farm. This young lady has so many sponsors. She is the #1 female athlete in basketball, of course. She broke Pistol Pete Maravich's record, Mark, and I love that ad from Nike because instead of their Just Do It, which they're of course famous for, Nike is, she did it, and she came out last night, shut down one of the best players in the nation, last year's series MVP, I think, Angel Reese, and this was just a fabulous performance by Iowa and Caitlyn Clark. I mean, she put up 41 last night. You and I were at the bar watching, Mark, and it's just swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. I mean, this was just a red letter day for Iowa sports and for her, Caitlyn Clark.
Yeah, it was hard to keep your attention on the business conversation last night. You were so focused, but of course, with a performance like that, it's very understandable. And Jon, I like to cover some of the business aspects of the sports stuff. She, I think, has $3.1 and counting $million in NILs, name, image, likeness endorsements, similar to what we just showed there. That's got to be a record, certainly for women's basketball, is it not?
Yeah, it is. And Angel Reese over at LSU had 1.8 million. Well-deserved down there as well, and she was the defending champ. But Caitlyn Clark's got Gatorade, Gainbridge, State Farm, Nike, Xfinity. I mean, just amazing, and I'm sure more to come. So we like to cover sports, and we like to see huge successes like her get recognized. And boy, is she ever. And by the way, I know it says WNBA on there, and she says she's going to be playing in the WNBA. I know Ice Cube, Mark, has offered her $5 million to come over and play in his 3-on-3 league that he has started. And I'm telling you, one of these days, the NBA, just like the NBA owns part of the WNBA, I think the NBA is going to own part of that 3-on-3. It's very exciting. And boy, she can shoot the lights out. So she would be perfect over in that 3-on-3. Anyway, folks, we always appreciate you joining us. We hope you share the Rebel's Edge with your friends. We hope you come back tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Remember, you can always go to marketrebellion.com/get started. That's marketrebellion.com/get started for education and subscriptions. Mark and I are heading over to the 10X right now over at the Diplomat Hotel.